The frayed rope sliced into Caleb Anderson's calloused palms as he descended into the darkness, the desperate cries of the woman below echoing against the stone walls of the well. It was 1876, and Lewiston, Idaho had seen its share of tragedies, but Caleb wasn't about to let this become another one, not while he still had breath in his lungs and strength in his arms. "Hold on," he shouted down into the abyss. "I'm coming for you." The summer heat beat down on Lewiston mercilessly, the sun high in the cloudless sky. The small frontier town nestled where the Snake and Clearwater rivers met had grown steadily since the gold rush days, but it still maintained the rugged character of the West. Caleb had only been passing through, driving cattle north when he'd heard the screams. Faith Zimmerman had been drawing water from the old Pearson well when the wooden platform had given way beneath her feet. Now she was treading water in the cold darkness, her sodden dress weighing her down, her strength fading with each passing minute. "Please hurry," she called up, her voice weaker than before. I cannot stay above water much longer." Caleb descended faster, ignoring the burning in his hands. The walls of the well were slick with moss and moisture, making it difficult to brace himself. Above him, he could hear the voices of townspeople who had gathered, holding the rope steady. 25 feet down was a long way to fall if something went wrong. "Almost there, miss," he called. "Just keep your head up." As Caleb neared the water's surface, he could finally see her, a pale face framed by dark hair, eyes wide with fear. Faith was struggling to stay afloat, her arms flailing weakly. "Take my hand," he urged, reaching down while maintaining his grip on the rope with his other hand. Faith's fingers brushed his, slipped away, then found purchase. Caleb's strong arm pulled her closer until he could secure her against him. "I've got her," he shouted upward. "Pull us up." The rope tightened as the people above began to haul them upward. Caleb held Faith tightly against him, her wet body trembling. "I've got you," he murmured. "Don't be afraid." Faith clung to him, her face buried against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was going to die down there." "Not today," Caleb assured her. "Not while I'm here." The ascent seemed to take an eternity. Faith was slight, but the water in her clothes added considerable weight. Caleb's muscles strained, and the rope cut deeper into his hands, but he refused to loosen his grip on either the woman or their lifeline. When they finally reached the top, eager hands pulled them to safety. Faith was immediately surrounded by concerned townspeople, wrapped in blankets and fussed over. Caleb stepped back, flexing his bleeding hands, watching as the town doctor examined her. "You're a hero, Cowboy," said an older man, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. "That's Jacob Zimmerman's daughter you saved. He owns the mercantile." Caleb nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just did what anyone would do." "Not just anyone would climb down a well to save a stranger," the man countered. "I'm Sheriff Thomas Walker." "You passing through or staying a while?" "Passing through," Caleb answered. "Got a herd of cattle to deliver to Spokane." The sheriff nodded. "Well, I reckon Jacob will want to thank you properly. You might want to stick around at least until tomorrow." Caleb's gaze drifted back to Faith, who was now sitting up, a blanket around her shoulders. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles, but even in her bedraggled state, there was something striking about her. She looked up then, her eyes meeting his across the gathered crowd, and a small smile touched her lips. Perhaps he could delay his journey by a day or two. Faith Zimmerman had never been so terrified in all her 22 years. The memory of the wooden platform splintering beneath her feet, the sickening sensation of falling, then the shock of the cold water closing over her head, it was all still vivid in her mind as she sat in her father's parlor, wrapped in dry clothes and blankets, a cup of hot tea in her hands. "You should rest, daughter," her father said, his brow furrowed with concern. Jacob Zimmerman was a stern man, widowed these past 5 years, who ran both his business and his household with precise efficiency. But today, his usual composure had been shattered by the near loss of his only child. "I am fine, father," Faith assured him, though her voice still trembled slightly. "Thanks to Mr. Anderson's bravery." As if summoned by her words, there was a knock at the front door. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, bustled to answer it, returning moments later with Caleb Anderson in tow. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. He'd changed into clean clothes, a simple white shirt and dark pants, but Faith could still see the bandages wrapped around his palms where the rope had cut him. "Mr. Anderson," her father said, rising to his feet, "please come in." "We are forever in your debt." Caleb nodded, stepping into the parlor. "Just wanted to check that Miss Zimmerman is recovering well." Faith met his gaze and felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. In the light of the parlor, she could properly see her rescuer for the first time. Caleb Anderson was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. "I am much improved, thank you," she said softly, "though I fear I shall never look at Wells the same way again." A small smile quirked the corner of Caleb's mouth. "Understandable, madam. Please sit down," Jacob insisted, gesturing to an armchair. "Mrs. Winters, bring our guest some coffee, and perhaps some of that apple pie if there's any left." Caleb hesitated, then took the offered seat. "I can't stay long. I've got a herd waiting." "Your men can manage without you for an evening," Jacob said firmly. "I insist you join us for dinner. It's the least we can do." Faith watched Caleb's discomfort with interest. He was clearly unused to such attention, more at home on the open range than in a parlor, yet there was a quiet dignity about him that intrigued her. "I understand you're driving cattle to Spokane," her father continued. "That's a challenging journey this time of year." "Yes, sir." "The buyer is expecting them by month's end." "What will you do afterward?" Caleb shrugged. "Find another job, I suppose. Been working cattle drives for 7 years now." "No home to return to?" Faith asked, then immediately regretted the personal question, but Caleb just shook his head. "Not anymore. Lost my folks' place in Montana to back taxes 3 years ago." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact, and Faith admired him all the more for it. "Well," her father said thoughtfully, "if you're looking for more permanent employment after your delivery, I may have a proposition for you. I've recently purchased land outside town for a small ranch operation. I could use a man who knows cattle." Caleb looked surprised. "That's generous, Mr. Zimmerman, but not generosity, Mr. Anderson. Good business. Men with your skills and courage are rare. Think about it while you finish your drive. The offer will stand when you return." The conversation shifted to other topics as dinner was served. Faith spoke little, content to observe the interplay between her father and the cowboy. There was something compelling about Caleb Anderson, not just his physical strength, which she had experienced firsthand, but a kind of inner fortitude that showed in the way he carried himself. As the evening drew to a close, Caleb rose to leave. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Zimmerman, and for the job offer. I'll consider it." "See that you do," Jacob replied. "Faith, perhaps you should show Mr. Anderson out while I discuss something with Mrs. Winters." Faith nodded, rising from her chair. She led Caleb to the front door, acutely aware of his tall presence behind her. At the threshold, she turned to face him. "I never properly thanked you, Mr. Anderson." "No thanks necessary, Miss Zimmerman." "Faith," she corrected. "After what you did today, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features. Then you should call me Caleb. Caleb, she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. Will you really consider my father's offer? He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. I might. Depends on what I find in Spokane. I hope you find reason to return, Faith said, surprising herself with her boldness. Lewiston could use more men like you. Could it now? There was a hint of teasing in his voice. Faith felt her cheeks warm. Safe travels, Caleb, and thank you again. For my life, he nodded, settling his hat on his head. Take care, Faith, and stay away from Wells. With that, he turned and walked into the gathering dusk, leaving Faith standing in the doorway, watching until his figure disappeared down the street. 2 weeks passed, and Faith found herself thinking of Caleb Anderson far more often than was proper. Each day, she helped her father at the mercantile, greeted customers, kept the books, and tried not to look up hopefully every time the bell above the door jingled. You seem distracted today, her father observed one afternoon as Faith miscounted the inventory of canned goods for the 3rd time. Just tired, father, she lied, returning to her task with renewed concentration. Jacob studied her for a moment. You know, I received word that the Anderson boy successfully delivered his herd to Spokane. Faith's head snapped up. Oh, that's good news. Indeed. Apparently, he declined a very lucrative offer to stay on with the buyer's operation. Faith felt her heart quicken. Did he say why? Jacob's mouth twitched with a hint of amusement. He did not elaborate, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him back in Lewiston before long. 3 days later, Faith was arranging a display of fabric when the bell above the door rang. She glanced up automatically, then froze. Caleb Anderson stood in the doorway, looking more polished than when she'd last seen him, but still unmistakably a man more at home on horseback than in town. Good afternoon, Miss Zimmerman, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Caleb, she breathed, then quickly composed herself. I mean, Mr. Anderson, welcome back to Lewiston. He approached the counter, removing his hat. I've come to speak with your father about that job offer if it still stands. It does, came Jacob's voice as he emerged from the back room. I'm glad to see you, Anderson. Let's discuss terms in my office. As the 2 men disappeared into the back, Faith found herself smoothing her hair and straightening her dress. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to the man in her father's office and what his return might mean. When they emerged half an hour later, both were smiling. Faith, her father called, Mr. Anderson has agreed to oversee our new ranch operation. He'll be staying in Lewiston for the foreseeable future. That's wonderful news, she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. Caleb's eyes met hers. Your father's made me a generous offer. Hard to pass up the chance to build something lasting. Mr. Anderson will be joining us for dinner again tonight, Jacob announced. Perhaps you could show him around town this afternoon, help him get his bearings. Faith recognized her father's scheme for what it was. Jacob Zimmerman had never been subtle, but she couldn't bring herself to mind. I'd be happy to if Mr. Anderson is amenable. I'd appreciate the guidance, Caleb said. And so Faith found herself walking beside Caleb through the streets of Lewiston, pointing out landmarks and introducing him to townspeople they encountered. He listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, and occasionally made observations that made her laugh. Your father seems determined to settle you near his home, Faith remarked as they paused by the river. Caleb glanced at her. Does that bother you? Not at all, she admitted. I'm glad you decided to return. Are you? His voice was soft and he stepped closer. Faith looked up into his face, at the eyes that had been the last thing she'd seen before nearly drowning and the first thing she'd focused on when pulled to safety. Yes, she whispered. Very glad. For a moment she thought he might kiss her there by the riverbank, but instead he offered his arm. "We should get back. Don't want to give the gossips too much to talk about on my first day." Faith took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him through his sleeve. "There will be talk regardless. Small towns thrive on it. Let them talk," he said with a shrug. "As long as I have your father's blessing to court you properly." Faith nearly stumbled. Is that your intention?" Caleb stopped walking, turning to face her. "Faith, I've crossed paths with many people in my travels, but none that made me want to stop traveling. Until now," her heart hammered in her chest. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you have a smile that lights up a room. And I know I want the chance to learn everything else." Faith's throat tightened with emotion. "Then I suppose we should hurry back for dinner," she managed. "There's much to discuss." As summer turned to autumn, Caleb Anderson proved himself not only capable but invaluable. The small ranch operation that Jacob had envisioned flourished under Caleb's experienced management. He hired good men, selected quality stock, and made improvements to the property that increased its value considerably. Faith watched his progress with admiration, but it was their evenings together that she treasured most. 3 times a week, Caleb would come to the Zimmerman home for dinner. Afterward, Jacob would conveniently remember paperwork that needed attention, leaving Faith and Caleb to converse in the parlor or stroll through town in the gathering dusk. "Tell me about Montana." Faith requested one such evening as they walked beneath trees turning golden with the season. Caleb's expression grew distant. It was beautiful, mountains that seemed to touch the sky, valleys so green in spring it hurt your eyes to look at them. "You miss it." "I miss what it was," he corrected. "A family home. My father worked that land for 30 years. Taught me everything I know about ranching." He paused. "But after they died, pneumonia took them both the same winter. The place felt hollow. When I lost it to taxes, it hurt, but part of me was relieved to leave the ghosts behind." Faith slipped her hand into his. "And now? Do you think you could make a home here?" His fingers tightened around hers. "I'm already starting to." October brought the Harvest Festival, and the whole town gathered to celebrate. Tables groaned with food, musicians played lively tunes, and lanterns illuminated the town square as evening fell. Faith, wearing her best dress of deep blue, found herself swept into a dance by Caleb, who moved with surprising grace for such a large man. "You've been holding out on me," she laughed as he twirled her expertly. "I didn't know cowboys could dance." "My mother insisted I learn," he admitted. Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn calf. Faith smiled at the image. "She sounds wonderful." "She would have liked you," Caleb said softly. Then, as the music ended, he kept hold of her hand. "Come with me for a moment." He led her away from the crowded square, to a quiet spot beside the church. The music and laughter continued in the background, but here, beneath a massive oak tree, they were alone. "Faith," Caleb began, his voice unusually serious, "these past months have been the happiest I can remember. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a sense of belonging." Faith's heart began to race as Caleb reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I spoke with your father yesterday," he continued. "He gave me his blessing but said the decision was yours alone." Caleb opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond. "Faith Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Faith's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." His face split into a wide grin as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, their first kiss gentle, but filled with promise. Faith wound her arms around his neck, letting herself be swept away by the feelings she'd harbored since the day he'd pulled her from the darkness. When they returned to the festival, hands linked and faces glowing. Their news spread quickly through the crowd. Jacob Zimmerman raised a toast to his daughter and future son-in-law. His normally stern countenance softened with genuine happiness. "To Faith and Caleb," he proclaimed, "may their life together be as blessed as mine was with my dear departed wife." As the town celebrated around them, Caleb leaned close to Faith's ear. "I never thought falling into a well could lead to falling in love," he murmured. Faith laughed, her happiness too great to contain. "God works in mysterious ways," she replied, squeezing his hand. "And I, for one, am grateful." The winter of 1876-1877 was harsh, with snow piling high and temperatures plummeting. But inside the Zimmerman home, preparations for a spring wedding created a warmth that defied the bitter cold outside. Faith and her friends sewed her wedding dress, while Caleb, with Jacob's help, built a small but sturdy house on the ranch property. "Not too small, I hope," Faith teased one evening as they looked over the plans. "I've always wanted a large family." Caleb's eyes darkened with emotion. "As many children as you want," he promised, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The house can always be expanded." February brought an unexpected thaw, turning the snow to slush and the roads to mud. It was during this brief respite from winter that disaster struck. A fire broke out in the livery stable, and with the buildings in town constructed primarily of wood, the danger of its spreading was immense. Caleb was at the ranch when the alarm bell rang. He immediately mounted his horse and raced toward town, his heart pounding with fear for Faith and her father. By the time he arrived, a bucket brigade had formed, but the fire was gaining ground, approaching dangerously close to the mercantile. He found Faith and Jacob evacuating the store, carrying out what valuables they could. "Get to safety," he urged them, helping with the last crate of ledgers. "The Wells family is trapped in their home," Faith told him, pointing to a building near the livery where flames were already licking at the porch. "No one can get through the fire to reach them." Before she could stop him, Caleb was running toward the burning buildings. He circled around, finding a narrow alley that was still passable, though filled with smoke. Pulling his bandana over his mouth and nose, he pushed through to the Wells home. Inside, he found Martha Wells and her 3 children huddled in a back room. "Come quickly," he ordered, gathering the smallest child in his arms. "Stay low and follow me." The return journey was harrowing. Smoke burned his lungs and twice burning debris nearly struck them. But Caleb managed to lead the family to safety, emerging into the clean air just as the roof of their home collapsed. Faith ran to him as he handed the child to Mrs. Wells. "You could have been killed," she scolded, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Couldn't let them die," Caleb coughed, his voice raw from smoke. "You brave, foolish man," she whispered, holding him tightly. The town rallied together in the aftermath of the fire. Though several buildings were lost, including the livery and 2 homes, no lives had been claimed, a miracle, many said, and in no small part thanks to Caleb Anderson's courage. As he recovered from smoke inhalation, confined to bed on doctor's orders, Caleb was visited by a steady stream of grateful townspeople. Faith rarely left his side, tending to him with loving care. "This is becoming a habit," she remarked as she brought him tea laced with honey for his throat. "You rushing headlong into danger to save others. Only seems to happen when you're around," he rasped, managing a smile. "You're a magnet for trouble, Faith Zimmerman." She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "Soon to be Faith Anderson," she reminded him. "Though I'm starting to wonder if I'll be a widow before I'm even a wife." Caleb squeezed her hand. "Not a chance. I've got too much to live for now." The fire delayed their wedding by a few weeks as the church needed repairs to its damaged roof. but on the first Sunday in April 1877, with apple blossoms scenting the air. Faith Zimmerman and Caleb Anderson were married before the entire population of Lewiston. Faith was radiant in her white dress with blue ribbons, her dark hair crowned with flowers. Caleb, standing tall in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes, scarcely able to believe that this remarkable woman had chosen him. "I, Caleb, take you, Faith, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice clear and strong. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Faith repeated the vows, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous, the entire town joining in to wish the newlyweds well. As evening fell, they slipped away to their new home, where Caleb lifted Faith into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in their small front room. Faith looked around at the simple but well-crafted furniture, the curtains she had sewn herself, the painting of Montana mountains that Caleb had commissioned as a surprise wedding gift. "It's perfect," she said softly. Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom window, Faith lay in her husband's arms listening to his steady heartbeat. "Do you ever think about that day at the well?" she asked. Caleb's hand stroked her hair. "Sometimes." "Why? I was so afraid," she admitted. "Not just of drowning, but of dying without having truly lived, without having loved." She propped herself up to look into his face. "And then there you were, this stranger willing to risk his life for mine. It seemed like something from a storybook." "Best decision I ever made," Caleb said, pulling her close. "Though next time you decide to go for a swim, maybe choose the river instead. It's less confining." Faith laughed, swatting his chest playfully. "I think I'll avoid swimming altogether, thank you very much." "Probably wise," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I can only rescue drowning damsels so many times before it starts to look suspicious." As spring turned to summer, Caleb and Faith settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The ranch flourished under Caleb's management, and Faith split her time between helping at the mercantile and making their house a home. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant colors, talking about their days and their dreams for the future. In July, Faith received a letter that left her pale and shaking. Caleb found her in the kitchen, the opened letter on the table before her. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "It's my Aunt Caroline," Faith explained. "My mother's sister. She's gravely ill and has asked to see me before." She couldn't finish the sentence. Caleb sat beside her, taking her hand. "Where does she live?" "San Francisco. I haven't seen her since I was a child, but she and my mother were very close. After Mother died, Aunt Caroline wrote to me regularly. She never had children of her own." "Then we should go," Caleb said simply. Faith looked at him in surprise. "But the ranch, your father can oversee things for a few weeks. Family is more important." And so, less than a week later, they boarded a train bound for California. It was Faith's first journey by rail, and despite her worry for her aunt, she couldn't help but be excited by the experience. Caleb, who had traveled more extensively, delighted in showing her the changing landscape as they moved west and south. "It's like watching a painting unfold," Faith marveled as they passed through mountains and valleys, deserts and forests. San Francisco was unlike anything Faith had ever seen, a bustling metropolis perched on hills overlooking a vast bay. The noise, the crowds, the towering buildings both intimidated and exhilarated her. Caleb, sensing her overwhelm, kept a protective arm around her as they navigated the busy streets to her aunt's home in a fashionable neighborhood near Nob Hill. Caroline Mills was indeed failing, her once robust frame now thin and frail, but her eyes lit up when Faith entered her bedroom. "My dearest niece," she said, extending a trembling hand. "How you've grown into your mother's beauty." Faith sat beside the bed, holding her aunt's hand. "I'm so glad we could come. And this must be the husband I've heard about," Caroline said, her gaze shifting to Caleb. "The heroic cowboy who rescued my niece from a well." Caleb bowed slightly. "Madam, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "Nonsense," Caroline waved weakly. "I've lived a full life. Now I get to see my beloved sister's daughter happily married before I go. That's a blessing." They stayed in San Francisco for 3 weeks. Each day, Faith spent hours with her aunt, listening to stories about her mother's youth, absorbing advice, and simply providing companionship. Caleb would often join them, charming Caroline with his straightforward manner and obvious devotion to Faith. In the afternoons, while Caroline rested, Caleb and Faith explored the city. They walked along the waterfront, marveling at ships from around the world. They visited Chinatown, fascinated by the foreign sights and smells. They rode cable cars up and down the steep hills, Faith clinging to Caleb's arm and laughing like a child. "I never imagined such places existed," Faith confessed as they stood atop a hill, looking out over the bay. "Lewiston seems so small in comparison." "Do you prefer this?" Caleb asked quietly. "The excitement of the city." Faith considered the question, then shook her head. "It's thrilling to visit, but I wouldn't want to live here. It's too disconnected. Everyone rushing about, barely acknowledging each other." She leaned against him. "I prefer our quiet porch and knowing our neighbors' names." Relief flickered across Caleb's face. "Good, because I'd live here if it made you happy, but I'd miss the open sky, something fierce." On their final evening in San Francisco, Caroline called Faith to her bedside. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, and both knew she had little time left. "I want you to have these," Caroline said, indicating a jewelry box on her nightstand. "Your mother's pearls. She would want you to have them." Faith opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a strand of pearls she remembered her mother wearing on special occasions. "Aunt Caroline, I couldn't—" "You can and you will," her aunt insisted. "And this too." She removed a ring from her finger, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I never had a daughter to pass it to. It should stay in the family." Tears slid down Faith's cheeks as she accepted the gifts. "I'll treasure them always." Caroline's face softened. "You found a good man, Faith. I see the way he looks at you the same way your uncle looked at me for 43 years. She patted Faith's hand. "Be happy, my dear. That's all that matters in the end." They departed the next morning, Caroline insisting they not delay their journey on her account. Tearful goodbyes were exchanged, promises to write made, though all knew they were unlikely to meet again in this life. The train ride home was quieter, both Faith and Caleb lost in their own thoughts. The emotional toll of the visit, coupled with the excitement of their adventures, left them weary. "Thank you," Faith said softly as they crossed into Idaho, "for coming with me. For understanding why it was important." Caleb pulled her closer. "Family is family, and your family is my family now." 2 days after they returned to Lewiston, a telegram arrived informing them that Caroline Mills had passed peacefully in her sleep. Faith mourned, but found comfort in having seen her aunt one last time and in Caleb's steady presence beside her. Life settled back into its rhythms, though subtly changed by their experiences. Faith hung a painting of San Francisco Bay in their sitting room, a reminder of their journey and her aunt's generosity. Caleb, inspired by some of the architectural details he'd seen in the city, added a more elaborate porch to their home, complete with intricate railings. As autumn approached, Faith began to suspect that their family would soon be growing. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news with Caleb. One evening, as they sat on their new porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly, watching his face. Caleb's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. "A baby," he repeated, his voice choked with emotion. "Our baby." Faith nodded, laughing as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "When?" he asked, setting her down carefully as if she'd suddenly become fragile. "Spring, the doctor thinks. April, perhaps." "A year after our wedding," Caleb mused, his hand returning to her stomach with reverence. "Perfect timing." The news spread quickly through Lewiston, bringing a flood of congratulations and advice from well-meaning neighbors. Jacob Zimmerman was particularly pleased, having made no secret of his desire for grandchildren. "My father is already planning the child's future," Faith laughed after one Sunday dinner, where Jacob had discussed the eventual expansion of the family businesses. "The poor thing isn't even born yet." "Can you blame him?" Caleb asked as they walked home in the gathering dusk. "He just wants the best for his grandchild, as do I." He squeezed her hand. "Our child will have opportunities we didn't. That's what matters." As Faith's pregnancy progressed, Caleb became increasingly protective. He insisted on hiring additional help at the ranch so he could spend more time at home. He worried when Faith continued working at the mercantile, though he knew better than to suggest she stop altogether. "I'm with child, not invalid," she reminded him when his hovering became too much. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "I know," he sighed, "but none of those other women are you." The winter was milder than the previous year, for which Faith was grateful. By February, she was finding it difficult to move comfortably with her expanded waistline. Caleb had crafted a beautiful cradle that sat ready in the corner of their bedroom, and a steady stream of hand-sewn baby clothes arrived from the women of Lewiston. In late March, a spring storm brought heavy rain that swelled the rivers and turned the roads to mud. Faith, now in her 9th month, was confined to the house, restless and uncomfortable. "The baby is taking after you," she complained good-naturedly to Caleb as they sat before the fire one evening. "Always on the move." Caleb laughed, placing his hand on her belly to feel the strong kicks. "A future cowboy or cowgirl, I reckon. As long as they stay away from wells," Faith said with a smile. The labor began before dawn the next day. Caleb rode through the rain to fetch the midwife and Faith's father, then returned to pace anxiously as Faith's cries echoed through their small home. "This is normal," the midwife assured him when he burst into the bedroom after a particularly loud scream. "Go wait with Jacob. We'll call you when it's time." The hours dragged on, Caleb growing more frantic with each passing minute. Jacob, having been through this once before, tried to distract him with conversation, but Caleb couldn't focus on anything beyond the sounds coming from the bedroom. Finally, as evening approached, a new cry joined Faith's, the lusty wail of a newborn. "Mr. Anderson," the midwife called. "Come meet your son." Caleb entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. Faith lay against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up at him with a tired smile. "He has your eyes," she said softly. Caleb approached the bed, almost afraid to look. But when he did, his heart seemed to stop, then restart with a new rhythm. The tiny face peering up from the blankets was red and wrinkled, topped with a wisp of dark hair. And yes, the eyes that blinked drowsily were the same blue as his own. "Would you like to hold your son?" Faith asked. With trembling hands, Caleb accepted the small bundle, cradling it awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence. "He's perfect," he whispered, a tear tracking down his cheek. "Absolutely perfect. What shall we name him?" Faith asked, watching the two most important men in her life getting acquainted. "Daniel," Caleb said without hesitation, "after my father." "Daniel Jacob Anderson," Faith nodded. "A good, strong name." Jacob was invited in to meet his grandson, his usual stoic demeanor crumbling at the sight of the tiny boy. "He has the Zimmerman chin," he declared proudly. "But the rest is all Anderson, I'm afraid." The following days were a blur of exhaustion and joy as Faith and Caleb adjusted to parenthood. Daniel proved to be a healthy, vocal baby with an appetite that kept Faith busy. Caleb found himself utterly enchanted by his son, spending hours just watching him sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. "I never knew I could love someone so much," he confessed to Faith one night as they stood over the cradle. "It's terrifying." Faith leaned against him, understanding completely. "We created a miracle," she said softly, "our own flesh and blood." As spring bloomed into summer, the Anderson family settled into their new normal. Caleb continued to expand the ranch operation, though he made sure to be home every evening to spend time with Faith and Daniel. Faith gradually resumed some of her duties at the mercantile, bringing the baby with her, much to the delight of customers. On the anniversary of Caleb's descent into the well to save Faith, they took Daniel to the spot where their story had begun. The old Pearson well had been filled in after the incident, deemed too dangerous to remain open, but a small stone marker indicated its location. "Hard to believe it was only 2 years ago," Faith mused, bouncing Daniel on her hip. "So much has changed." "For the better," Caleb said, his arm around her waist. "Though I still have nightmares sometimes, hearing you call for help but not being able to reach you in time." Faith leaned into him. "But you did reach me. You've been saving me every day since." "And you've been saving me right back," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "From a life of wandering, from loneliness." He tickled Daniel's chin, eliciting a gurgling laugh. "You gave me a family, Faith. A home." "Speaking of family," Faith said, a smile playing at her lips. "I think Daniel might be getting a little brother or sister soon." Caleb stared at her in disbelief. "Already? Are you certain?" She nodded. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. This one should arrive in winter." Caleb let out a whoop of joy that startled Daniel, then gathered both his wife and son into a careful embrace. "I am the luckiest man alive," he declared. As they walked home through the streets of Lewiston, Faith reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. A collapsed well platform, a passing cowboy with a brave heart, a love that had grown from the seeds of gratitude into something enduring and profound. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "Just that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't fallen into that well, I'd have found you eventually," Caleb said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Faith. We were meant to be." She smiled up at him, this man who had literally pulled her from the darkness into light. "I believe that too," she said softly, "with all my heart." And as the sun set over Lewiston, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the Anderson family continued toward home, not just the house they'd built together, but the life they'd created from courage, compassion, and love that had begun with a desperate cry for help and a cowboy brave enough to answer. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Daniel was joined by a sister, Emma, born during a snowstorm in January 1879. Caleb had been forced to deliver her himself when the midwife couldn't reach their home through the deep drifts. Though terrified, He had followed Faith's instructions and brought their daughter safely into the world, another rescue to add to his tally. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, with the same dark hair as his mother and his father's determined spirit. The Anderson home expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Caleb adding rooms and Faith creating a garden that became the envy of Lewiston. Through it all, their love deepened, weathering the storms of life just as they had weathered that first crisis at the well. There were arguments, of course, Faith's stubborn independence occasionally clashing with Caleb's protective instincts, but they always found their way back to each other, stronger for having worked through their differences. The ranch prospered under Caleb's guidance. What had begun as a small operation gradually expanded into one of the most successful in the region. Jacob Zimmerman, seeing his son-in-law's business acumen, increasingly relied on Caleb to help manage the mercantile as well, eventually making him a full partner. In 1885, tragedy struck when Jacob suffered a stroke. For weeks, he lingered between life and death, Faith at his bedside whenever possible. When he finally passed, the entire town mourned the loss of one of its most respected citizens. "He was proud of you," Caleb told Faith as they stood at the freshly dug grave. "Of us. Of what we built together." Faith, holding Emma's hand while Thomas clung to her skirts, nodded through her tears. "He gave me the greatest gift when he offered you that job," she said. "He saw in you what I came to love." With Jacob's passing, Caleb and Faith became the sole owners of both the ranch and the mercantile. The responsibility was enormous, but they faced it together, as they had faced everything since that fateful day at the well. Daniel, now 8, began showing a keen interest in the ranch operations, following Caleb everywhere and asking endless questions. Emma, at 6, was already helping Faith with simple tasks at the store, charming customers with her sunny disposition. 3-year-old Thomas was into everything, keeping both parents on their toes. "Sometimes I think we should have named him Tornado," Faith laughed one evening after chasing him away from the cookie jar for the 3rd time. "He comes by it honestly," Caleb reminded her. "You're no stranger to adventure yourself, Mrs. Anderson." Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Summers were spent working the ranch, with occasional picnics by the river where Caleb taught the children to fish. Winters brought cozy evenings around the fireplace, with Caleb telling stories of his travels and Faith reading aloud from favorite books. Spring and autumn were busy with planting and harvest, the whole family working together. In 1887, when Daniel was 10, Emma 8, and Thomas 5, Faith discovered she was expecting their 4th child. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, her body showing the strain of multiple childbirths and the demands of her active life. "You need to rest more," Caleb insisted as Faith continued to work at the mercantile well into her 7th month. "The store can manage without you for a few weeks. And who would keep you all in line?" she teased, though she did agree to reduce her hours. On a warm night in August, their 2nd daughter arrived, Catherine, named after Caleb's mother. She was smaller than her siblings had been at birth, but with a strong cry that assured everyone of her vitality. "She's perfect," Caleb whispered as he held her for the first time, still awed by the miracle of new life even after 3 previous children. "She's the last," Faith said firmly, though with a smile. 4 is quite enough, don't you think?" Caleb looked around at their brood, Daniel hovering nearby, eager for his turn to hold the baby. Emma arranging flowers by the bed, Thomas peering curiously at his new sister. "More than I ever dreamed of having," he agreed. As the children grew, Lewiston grew as well. The small frontier town gradually became a proper city, with more amenities and opportunities. The railroad connected them more efficiently to the rest of the country, bringing new people and ideas. In 1890, Idaho achieved statehood, an occasion marked by celebrations throughout the territory. The Anderson family attended the festivities in Lewiston, 13-year-old Daniel proudly carrying a new state flag, 10-year-old Thomas setting off firecrackers, much to his mother's dismay, and 11-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Catherine watching the parade in matching blue dresses. "Did you ever imagine this when you first came to Lewiston?" Faith asked Caleb as they watched their children join in a folk dance on the town square. "Never," he admitted. "I was just passing through, remember, had no plans to stay more than a night." He squeezed her hand. "Then some troublemaking woman had to go and fall down a well." Faith laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "Best mistake I ever made." As the new century approached, Caleb and Faith found themselves discussing the future more frequently. Daniel, now 22 and recently graduated from college in Portland, was eager to modernize the ranch with new breeding techniques he'd studied. Emma, at 20, was teaching at the Lewiston school and engaged to the young doctor who had recently set up practice in town. Thomas, 17 and as restless as his father had once been, talked of seeing more of the world before settling down. Catherine, at 12, showed a talent for numbers that suggested she might one day take over management of the mercantile. "They're finding their own paths," Faith observed one evening as she and Caleb sat on their porch, watching the sunset in a ritual they had maintained for over 2 decades. "That's as it should be," Caleb replied, "though I'll miss them when they go." "We'll still have each other," Faith reminded him, her hand finding his as it had countless times over the years. Though her hair now showed streaks of silver and lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, she was still the most beautiful woman Caleb had ever seen. "Always," he agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. In the spring of 1900, as a new century dawned, Caleb and Faith celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary. Their children organized a surprise gathering, bringing together friends and neighbors who had been part of their journey. The old Pearson well site, long since transformed into a small garden, became the setting for the celebration. Tables laden with food, lanterns hanging from trees, and music filling the air created a festive atmosphere. During a lull in the festivities, Caleb pulled Faith aside, leading her to the exact spot where the well had once been. A rose bush now grew there, its blooms bright against the green foliage. 23 years ago," he said softly, "I heard a cry for help and found the other half of my soul." Faith's eyes shimmered with tears. "And I found the man who would not only save my life but make it worth living every single day since." They stood together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build. From the darkest moment of Faith's life had sprung a love story that had only grown stronger with time. "What do you think the next 23 years will bring?" Faith asked, her head resting against Caleb's shoulder. "More adventures," he replied, his arm secure around her waist. "More challenges, more joy." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "As long as we face them together, that's all that matters." And as their children called them back to the celebration, Faith and Caleb walked hand in hand, just as they had since the day a brave cowboy had climbed down a rope to save a drowning woman, not knowing he was really saving himself, and beginning a love story that would stand the test of time.